A very good day to you wherever you are in the world, tuning in to this new podcast series, 5 Things You Need to Know. I'm Chris Wren. I'm 26 years here in Indonesia. I've completed 16 years leading the British Chamber of Commerce. In all that time, the focus has been on providing market access support and business development strategies to businesses looking at Indonesia. One thing that I would like to say, my only lecture point to you, is if Indonesia is not on your radar, it must be because you've already researched it and you've already ruled it out. Otherwise, tune in here, gain some great experiences, gain some great tips, and make sure that this 5 things you need to know builds into a compendium of compelling knowledge that helps you develop your strategy for market access to this great, dynamic archipelago, Indonesia. It's a real privilege for me to introduce you to Joel Pember. Joel is the founder and director of Juicebox. His particular expertise is on brand strategy and digital strategy. As you will be aware that the whole context of these podcasts, Joel, are about trying to extract 5 things that our listeners need to know about Indonesia and their business plans and strategies towards Indonesia. I think with that in mind, perhaps we should do a little bit of scene setting.
Of course.
In which case, probably it's best for you to just tell us a little bit about Juicebox, how it started, what its strengths are, and why we're here in Bali.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. Look, our story is a pretty organic one. It started nearly 16 years ago in my bedroom, that whole classic bedroom startup story. Our timing was really, I think, a big part of our success in terms of when we founded the business. It was the start of the smartphone, the social media revolution. We very much rode the wave of that for the next sort of decade, if you will. All the while, growing up from being a young adult into and a young professional into maturing along the way and really understanding what business is and what value we were delivering. So we started building websites in sort of 2008. We got better and better at this to the point where we became almost probably the best in our local market, and had the awards to prove that along the way. Fast forward to today, we are currently the Digital Agency of the Year in Western Australia. And for us, we are building not only website experiences, but quite sophisticated web applications, various SaaS platforms, and these days sort of investing more into Web3 and AI applications as well. So we sort of, an umbrella term for all those things is digital products and experiences. But I think probably the only caveat or additional piece that we need to add to that is that, we're not a development house. This is not just about coding and building great tech. We're brand led. We're experience design led. For us, if it's not actually, delivering on that front, then we're not actually innovating or improving things. So we very much need to understand that brand, really understand the experience design, as well as build with these breakthrough technologies.
Joel, you're an Aussie.
Yes.
I'm a Pommy.
Yes.
There isn't any rugby on or cricket at the moment that would naturally bring us together for banter. We're brought together by the fact that 2 new directors in your business,
Yes.
Your merged business now, John on the one hand and Tom on the other hand. John is British. Tom and John together are working with the British Chamber of Commerce as leaders of the different committee hubs. But how did you connect with those two? Because I think that sort of speaks to why we're here in Bali.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was again a pretty organic story, and when I say organic, not by design, but a bit of a chance encounter, maybe serendipitous. But Tom actually reached out to us. I think there was a digital agency or some sort of agency for sale, and he picked up the phone and asked, "Are you for sale?" And we said, "No. Why would you even ask that?" That was where the relationship started. And I think at the time, Tom and John were looking for an Australian-based agency to potentially acquire and have that sort of generate business in Australia that would feed back up into the Indonesian business that they'd established. We found that quite interesting in the very surface level conversation that we had. And Chris, who is our managing director and my business partner, he continued that conversation. He was quite interested by the fact that they were exploring this as a potential business model. We started to deliver a few projects together. We would start to design and concept in Australia and then have the Indonesian team build. And so it was an outsourced model for us. But over time, and certainly as COVID had hit, Island Media had basically run out of clients. The business here had stopped. It's obviously very tourism and hospitality orientated here in Bali. And we became a bit of a lifeline and started to produce, well, they were producing a lot of our work. It was a fantastic experience because it brought our teams closer together. We integrated more deeply than ever before. And so, fast forward to now, people go, "Oh, why did you merge? Why did you do this business deal? Why did you come to Indonesia?" We've already been on a 3-4 year journey. It in its infancy very started before COVID, but COVID accelerated that integration to the point where we are working together, and we sort of saw it almost dangerous not to be one entity at that point. And so last year we decided to make it official.
Great. There are a couple of things you mentioned there, and the first one is that you weren't for sale. It just goes to show that there's always, if the terms are right, there's always a willing buyer and a willing seller, and you found the terms. And I guess the other interesting thing is during COVID, I was wondering whether we could actually have a conversation without mentioning COVID, but we can't.
Sorry.
No problem. During COVID, yes, Bali is something like 80-85% dependent directly or indirectly on the hospitality sector. So I really get the fact that the island business would have been struggling, and you would have been important to their survival at the time and probably forward look to sustainability. But then they became your forward look to business development and growth, regional growth. Could you just talk to me a little bit more about that aspect?
Yeah, and look, genuinely, I think that was the surprise for me, because Chris, my business partner, was certainly driving, I guess, that first part of the relationship. But as soon as my eyes were opened to the possibilities of looking northward from Perth, rather than looking eastward towards the larger capital cities, Melbourne and Sydney, in Australia, all of a sudden our focus into the Southeast Asian region, obviously headlines being fastest growing region on the planet, and obviously huge populations and rising countries, and I don't need to probably rattle off all those sound bites, but we were excited about that. I'm not sure if the people watching this or listening to this have been to Western Australia, but we certainly consider ourselves sometimes our own little country away from the rest of Australia on some of occasions. And I think the time zone also, looking northward and having Indonesia, having the likes of Singapore all on our time zone, it made complete sense for us to potentially look northward. Indonesia represents a huge opportunity that I didn't quite consider until probably the last 24 months. And I think with respect to where we are in Western Australia, we're a big resource and energy hub. I think we call ourselves or think of ourselves as the Silicon Valley of mining. A lot of the technologies, a lot of the businesses that are based in Western Australia in that sector are quite literally world leading. The technologies are even being exported and the knowledge sharing back to NASA to take to the moon and onto Mars. The remote mining operations that happen in the Pilbara region are comparable with that we are going to need to take to Mars if we are to actually colonize Mars at some point. So we are world class on many fronts, but we're also very isolated. And I think looking at what's happening in Indonesia and looking at not only the country rising as a superpower and an economy, it's also got an immense natural resource here as well. And when we move into thematics around decarbonisation and electrification of the global economies, we've got critical minerals that we're going to need. Indonesia can supply this, but they've also can obviously bring in the labour component to build a manufacturing base here. So not just pulling those minerals out of the ground and shipping them off, but potentially producing batteries. And I think there are plans from the government to make Indonesia a battery manufacturing superpower, something which the Australian government and leadership are very aware of and have also set up deals to provide lithium into those contracts. So we were getting all the signals from our government in Australia as well to sort of Western Australia in particular to look northward to Indonesia to potentially see if there were trade opportunities or even cross-border opportunities. And with that, we saw opportunity to, with our merger to bring a lot of the smarts that we've been delivering for a lot of the tier one mining and energy companies back in Western Australia to Indonesia, to get them talking and engaging with audiences and stakeholders and investors about the thematics and the types of things that we've been discussing in Australia for some time. So, yeah, huge opportunity on that front.
You mentioned Mars. Let's just bring people back down to earth just a little bit. We'll do Mars another time, maybe.
Yeah, sure.
Probably we're not that experienced in terms of Western Australia and business. We see the impacts and understand the proximity thing, and Bali certainly does in terms of Australian tourists coming here and their dependence on them. So get the logic and get the sense from a BritCham point of view and somebody who has been providing market access support and helping businesses with business development strategies coming into Indonesia. I can say that the technology, the digital sector, the media sector, the marketing sector has been, for the large part, guilty of a little bit of arrogance. They think they've got a bit of a brand name in whichever country they're in, and they can simply turn up in this in this place of, as you say, we won't go into the stats. They are very, very compelling, and many of them don't make it, and they wonder why not. And then they revert to looking at the collaborative approach. But you've taken the collaborative approach, and without me feeding you with anything here, I guess what you've done is circumvented a long period of time where you would have been gaining experience of the market, acquiring contracts that perhaps in a highly competitive environment, and without ever having really the knowledge of just how business works in Indonesia. Question.
Yes.
Would you have come here on your own?
No, would be the short answer. I think, look, you can look at a market opportunity and of course be excited by it. But the reality of entering a new market is not something that you should take lightly. I think we did it because we had a trusted new business partners. That merger and the fact that the guys have been on the ground for 10 plus years now really gave us that shortcut in. we are currently exploring the idea of a Singapore-based business. Again, do we set up our own shop or do we merge and acquire something there? But I think coming into this market and really having someone already having navigated the complexities, understanding the cultural nuance, understanding the market and the behaviour and the demand that potentially exists, is something I don't think I would have jumped in as deeply as we have.
Sure.
I think saying all that, there's still been a massive period of learning. Thankfully I just haven't had to be bogged down in some of the stuff that you potentially don't get excited about. So I'm talking about compliance and regulation and all the things that you absolutely have to do and be respectful of, obviously, the country's processes and systems. But from our perspective, we can come in, not have to worry about that, knowing that we've got a partner that's already been, and established everything and is fully compliant, and we can look forward and go, okay, where else do we grow in this market? And one of the most exciting parts for us is bringing new capability into the Indonesian market and exploring whether brands and organizations here are actually seeking some of the parts of our offering, or whether we need to educate and bring more people along for the ride on those types of things.
And I think that's a perfect segue actually into your areas of historical expertise and your personal expertise in terms of brand strategist. And that question you raise as to whether the market needs to be educated. Let's be very, very frank. Indonesia has huge challenges in relation to how it is going to energy transition, how it is going to tackle its commitments in terms of net zero and decarbonization generally. The country has no reason whatsoever to be ashamed of the fact that, its assets are in natural resources, and it has been so heavily committed to the fossil fuels. Not just Indonesia, it's just perhaps more exaggerated here. But things are changing globally. You have the experience of a Western country that might be sat east of Indonesia, but still with that Western outlook in terms of what consumers expect and how governments are driven. How would you plan to begin this educative process? Because, personally, that's what I think the challenge will be for you guys. And I'm sure you're going to get there and you're going to win it. But there will need to be patience. There will need to be a strategy around that education to show that you are an organization that can actually help them get into that better place for their brands in the context of, as we mentioned, decarbonization, the pace of energy transition, moving them from accusations of whitewashing and other washing, and so on. So how might you begin that?
Yeah, pretty big question and lots to unpack there. I think, let me say this. In Western Australia, we are, if you are not employed directly by the energy or resources sector, you're one, maybe two steps removed, right? And so, yes, we are a Western country, if you want to label it that. But I think the mindset certainly is that energy and resources is critical. It's a critical part of the global economy, and we play a critical role. In fact, a lot of products and services and utilities just wouldn't occur if the Western Australian economy didn't exist. The narrative that we have back home is we need to transition. We absolutely need to be part of the global commitments, and we want to be responsible to the next generations. We need to be held accountable, and for the future generations. And I think Indonesia just needs to recognize its place in the global stage, like on the global stage. And, that's, yes, looking after its own citizens, making sure that all the opportunities are provided to Indonesians, and building their economy to what they need it to be and want it to be, but equally having a responsible global citizen role. And I think that's where the complexities exist, is getting that balance right, knowing where you're playing on the global stage and what role you're having on that global stage, whilst balancing that with lifting and rising, increasing the opportunities for your own people. And now, obviously, Indonesia has huge population, but an amazing opportunity with the average age, I think it's something like 32, which is relatively young compared to many other nations on the planet. Incredibly technologically savvy, and incredibly, the new generations are increasingly educated. So you've got all this opportunity to potentially transform from within, and seize the moment, if you will, to move into new industries, to innovate and shift the way that certain things are thought about. So how do we play a role in all that? I think we can. We've seen some pretty dramatic shifts in the way some of the companies, the energy companies, the mining companies back home are talking about what they do and how they play a critical role in the transition process. I think there's some lessons to bring to the Indonesian market with respect to that. I think communications just in general probably needs to be improved here in Indonesia. I think there's some lessons to potentially bring into the market here. I'm talking about things like transparency, and reporting and governance on those things. I'm not just talking about policy settings and getting deep on sort of government regulation. I'm talking about relationships that brands and companies have with customers. This, I think, where Indonesia can have some quick wins is really for brands and companies to have deeper, more meaningful relationships with their customers, less transactional, and more meaningful. So I look forward to sort of coming in to Jakarta and working with the people that are the custodians of some of the larger businesses and brands, and figuring out who those brands matter to most, what audiences they actually have, what stakeholders they actually have, and figuring out really what that brand needs to say to them in a meaningful way, rather than it just being so surface level. And that's, I guess, an observation that I've had. I think there's a lot of opportunity to potentially come in and almost re-engineer the way that brands connect.
So I think you'll be pleased to hear that as somebody that's also been here for quite some time and who engages with government significantly, we do get the sense that Indonesia is accepting that it has a significant global role to play.
Yeah.
It is the only Southeast Asian nation that is a member of the G20. Mm-hmm. And it does have all of those underlying complexities that it has to work through. And it is going to have to rely significantly on corporates and how corporates are educated by organizations like yourself, for example. And corporates do seem to be waking up to the fact that actually a lot of their own future sustainability and future profitability is going to be responsiveness ultimately to consumer-driven demand and consumer-driven behaviors,
yes,
which they are observing around the world, not just in extractives, but other commodities, which we don't have time to go into. You mentioned global. You also, now it's my turn, because you mentioned the pandemic, or you mentioned COVID. Of course, every business before COVID had a plan to go digital, to unroll a digital strategy, and so on. COVID happened just like that. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, just about every business found itself embracing digital something in a way that it hadn't done before. So digital has become a way of life, a way of corporate life. And I guess businesses that fail to recognize that embedded within all of their marketing and growth strategies must be the need to use digital everything as an asset in the best ways they can.
Yeah.
Have you got one or two tips, I'm thinking more of those companies that are not the large ones. They're perhaps the SMEs. They could even be the startups that don't necessarily have the big budgets to set aside for things that don't appear to be obvious, quick returns on investment. Do you have any tips for them as to how they might incorporate digital as just part of everyday corporate planning and use?
I'm going to narrow the focus in on a particular subset. I think startups are their own thing. I think you'd struggle to find many startups that aren't digital first these days.
Sure.
But let's look at maybe scale up SME as a segment. You say obviously every business on the planet was sort of forced to adopt digital technologies through the pandemic, but it was reactionary. It was a reactive step. And look, maturity obviously was fast tracked. Something like 5 years, I think McKinsey quoted, within 3 to 6 months, which is incredible pace. But it was reactive, and it wasn't by design, and it wasn't a considered investment and strategic approach. It was, we need to react, and we're going to fast track this. And I think the culture of teams, of organizations wasn't quite ready for it. Forced into it, behaviors were forced, rather than it being somewhere that everyone wanted to go. And that's the big difference. So I think in terms of digital transformation these days, and I think there's a stat that if 97% of C-suite around the world say that their digital transformation efforts are just allowing them to keep pace, it's not actually allowing them to innovate in terms of growth or customer experience, right? So you can have all the digital transformation, if you want to label it that you like. It's really just business transformation for modern business, where you're looking for productivity gains, you're looking for operational efficiency. But really, I think where brands and organizations are failing to consider digital transformation is in the customer experience piece. How does your organization connect with its people in better, new, different ways than it has before in the past? We've got all these amazing technologies. It's seeming to me that everyone just seems to build the status quo and continue to operate in the status quo when it comes to channels that are already sort of well trodden. I think there's a real opportunity for brands to break the mold and to potentially stretch their categories and maybe even disrupt their own category with the use of digital technology through the lens of customer experience. So for me, the opportunity lies in, yes, digital transformation being the umbrella thematic that all businesses on the planet are looking at right now. But if you look at it through the lens of customer experience, how are you going to use digital technology to reimagine the way that we connect with our customers? That's the part that I think needs to be unlocked. And that is not just about communicating with those customers. It's potentially about redesigning the product and services that these organizations offer. If you engaging with your customers and your target market this way now, well, how do we potentially build that from the ground up in a new digital first reality? And I think the businesses that are brave enough to sort of really rethink almost their core offering and come back to the way that they maybe connect with their market are the ones that are going to win tomorrow.
Okay, great. I know we're short of time and you're needing to head to the airport very, very shortly. So I'd sort of like to bring things to a little bit of a wrap. You've talked to us about really the one way of de-risking or managing risk in terms of market access is to take the collaborative approach.
Yep.
You wouldn't just advise it, you've done it yourself. You've talked about the need probably in terms of the challenge of energy transition, decarbonization, heading to net zero. First of all, it's global, but it also needs to get on board governments, companies as well, and to be listening very, very carefully to end users and how they feel about the way the world is going forward. We've talked about digital now being part of an experience. It's part of business. It's not something out there separate all on its own. But again, embedded into everything that we do. And of course, you fully appreciate the scale of Indonesia itself, and can appreciate why businesses are looking at Indonesia and are wanting to have a go at Indonesia. And you've mentioned some of the ways of managing those risks. But another way, of course, is to actually embrace the ecosystems that are available in countries that are well established. In terms of your directors now of this merged entity, Juicebox and Island, in particular, I'm thinking obviously about the Tom and John who brought us together here for this. In terms of them and what you have seen, what would you suggest to businesses on the outside of ways that they can once again supplement all the other obvious areas of guidance, consultancy, and so on?
Yeah, look, I think wherever a business operates, it needs to be part of a community, part of a network. I think when you are part of a network of sorts, and wherever you are in the world, it's about how much you give to that network rather than how much you take. And I think the more you give, seemingly the more comes back. And that can be on a very one-to-one, one-to-one personal relationship, but I think it same goes at an organizational level, right? If you are, and this is, I guess, the approach that we certainly want to take with respect to Indonesia is we're not here for a quick win. We are here to stay, to be invested, to spend the time, to help and support businesses that are looking to grow and to form relationships and help and support people that are trying to come here. And that's why organizations, certainly like BritCham, are critical wherever you're operating, because those relationships, those supports that you provide to others will come right back at you. It's not just the support mechanisms and obviously making sure that you're not sinking. It's about growth. You grow together. So for us, I don't think I would do. And this goes right back to the start of the business. We've always been involved in groups of this kind because we believe that if you're surrounded by good people, then you're going to be just fine. So, why would we try and change that model coming into a new market?
Great. Joel, as I say, I know you've got to go. I feel like every area we've touched on is actually just so important for so many organizations today. So I certainly have no doubt that your merged organization is going to have significant success. You have the eco-structure around you. In country now, you have got that very, very deep experience. And also, as you say, you bring with it some particular experiences that are not unique, but overlap so wonderfully with some of the challenges that are facing businesses in Indonesia. So I have no doubt that with patience, with perseverance, that you will have a very, very successful merged entity. And I'd just like to get your commitment now to come back to BritCham and perhaps do a deeper dive on some of those topics through our hubs when you're next perhaps popping in, but also to reflect, and this is what I'm really interested in, to reflect on how the actualization of this merger and things go forward for you matches or doesn't with how you perceived it might.
Expectations.
Right, because if there's one thing absolutely for sure about Indonesia, things rarely ever go exactly to plan.
Yeah.
It's part of the excitement of this particular market. It's the dynamics of this country.
Look, I appreciate everything you said just there. I would love to come and engage with BritCham members in any which way. As I said, we are going nowhere. We will be here for a long time, and I would love to sort of share knowledge and not only share but also receive some knowledge from others in the group as well. So you'll definitely see us potentially at some upcoming meetings, and if there are any other formats that you want us to potentially participate in, we'd be more than happy to join.
That would be great. Joel, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
On this occasion, I offer my sincere thanks to the Bali-based directors of the newly merged Juicebox, John and Tom, both of whom are committee leads for two of our hubs, the SME and the Technology and Digitalization Hub. Without their assistance, we could not have made this particular podcast episode. So thanks to both of them. This particular series is brought to you in partnership with the British Chamber of Commerce in Indonesia, BritCham. If you as a member of the audience would like your messages, your products, your services to reach the audience of this podcast series, and you'd like information on partnerships, then please touch base with me directly. Otherwise, if you found these 5 things you need to know useful to you, do go ahead and share with colleagues, associates, and friends. Above all, please follow us. Thank you.